This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host, Maura Donley. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, I believe that at this point, everyone in the Commonwealth is praying for Senator Fetterman, and we wish him certainly our best and for a speedy recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah, I give him a lot of credit for doing what he needs to do. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is an interesting contrast. He had gotten into the Senate, I guess, and been there a week. And Dr. Oz, while he was admitted to the hospital, was in Turkey pulling out earthquake victims from the rubble. So we have two people that
Study
are still
in contrast.
very much so, very much so, and still in the news.
Right.
Very much so. So today we're lucky enough to have with us our resident expert about transportation in Pennsylvania. We have Bob Latham with us. Welcome back, Bob. Bob, you are, of course, the Executive Vice President for the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors.
Yes, great to be with both of you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
There's so much new to talk about, Bob. Hardly know where to start. We find that there's a new state budget. Governor Shapiro has put forth a new Commonwealth budget, and there are lots of things in there to talk about for transportation. One is the perennial subject, which we've talked about with you many times, funding for the state police versus funding for our roads. Can you tell us what's going on and what your organization thinks of it?
Certainly. So the Governor Shapiro has addressed the issue of the state police in his budget. Finally, I would say for the first time, a governor is proposing a new funding source or a funding bucket, if you will, for the state police within the general fund. The previous arguments have always been, well, if you shift the highway user fee tax levies that are now going into the transportation fund that motorists think are going to improve roads back to road improvements, well, that'll leave a hole in the general fund, and where do you make up for that? So the Governor Shapiro's approach has been, we're going to set up a separate fund for law enforcement within the general fund, and that's where the money will come from for the state police. And again, it's very important to draw the distinction here that we're not talking about cutting the state police budget. We're not talking about defunding the police in any way. We've always been talking about keeping the faith with motorists and highway users who feel that when they pay their gasoline tax, when they pay their registration fees in Pennsylvania, that money is going to road improvements to make roads safer and more efficient and allow people to get around better. So the governor has proposed to move right now, currently there's $500 million still of highway user fees, and that's about 9 cents of your 50 some cents a gallon gas tax that's going over to the general fund for the state police. This would, governor's proposal is to move 100 of that back over to the special fund in the general fund, which is a start. It's not as far as we'd like to see it go. We'd like to see the whole 500 go back for road improvements. And so the Senate has taken a different approach as well.
So where are we in terms of the diversions that have occurred over the last several years out of the motor license fund? Have we caught back up? What does this mean for highway construction in general?
Sure. So you recall that that in 2021, the Congress and President Biden enacted the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that created about a 20% increase in what they call formula funding. It's money goes into the federal treasury and then by formula goes back out to the states. Pennsylvania saw an increase of some $4 billion out of that over a 5-year period of time. So that was a a big improvement for us. One of the concerns we had was, would we have enough money at the state level in order to match that money? Well, PennDOT tells us that they have enough money to match the formula monies, but it's important to understand that in addition to the federal formula monies, there's all kinds of grant programs for major bridges and other things. You might recall that a month or so ago, there was a big press conference at the in Cincinnati, kind of at the Ohio-Kentucky border, for funding for a major bridge across the river there from Cincinnati into Kentucky. So projects like that. And we have, of course, no shortage of major bridges here in Pennsylvania that need to be funded as well. So to get back to your question, what it means is if we were to able to move some of this, more of this money more rapidly over back into the motor license fund from funding the state police, finding that other source for the state police, that will allow us to match these grant projects. And the more match that you can put up at the state level, the better chance you have of getting those. So I think that we've made an improvement over the last several years, and the fact that the governor has put this in his budget, the Senate has passed legislation already, it's still at the forefront of political discourse.
Bob, do you have an idea how many of these bridges are critical? How many bridges in the Commonwealth are in critical need
We've made some progress.
Of repair?
Yes, I mean, we've actually cut the number of what we would call bad bridges or deficient bridges in half. Now, understand, it doesn't mean that they're unsafe. It just means that they are going to be in need of repair in some fashion here shortly. So we've reduced that number from 6,000 to 3,000 over the past 10 years or so. So we've cut that in half. We've made a lot of progress with previous funding legislation going back to 2013, actually going back to the Corbett administration. But our geography, our geology, the number of rivers and mountains and so on and so forth, the climate that we have here in Pennsylvania, freeze-thaw, makes us very unique and makes this a struggle for us.
So as long as we're talking about funding, what's going on with electric vehicles? They currently don't make any contribution to our roads and fixing our bridges. Is there any movement at all on electric vehicles?
Yeah, there's a big discussion about how to go about that. You know, how to apply a sort of a mileage-based fee for electric vehicles. And I know that Senate Transportation Chair Wayne Langerholt had a hearing in Pittsburgh last week on the subject, looking at exactly, what are our options beyond just levying a big registration fee, which has always been the solution that's been proposed is, well, let's just make the registration fee for electric vehicles commensurate with what a gasoline power car would pay in gas taxes. So that's one approach. Another approach is to try to find some way of measuring the mileage that they use. and that's an interesting debate, and one that I think we're going to see going on here for the next year or so, because our policy here in Pennsylvania has always been what we call a low entry fee to the system. So our registration fees are much lower than other states, but our gas tax is higher. And the theory there is, it doesn't cost much to put your car on the road to drive to church once a week. But if you're driving all over the Commonwealth, you're burning more gasoline, you're paying more gas tax, and ostensibly you're using the roads. So looking at that same approach to electric vehicles is something that the policymakers are looking at now.
Again, numbers. Do we have any idea how many electric vehicles are in Pennsylvania at the present time, Bob?
Well, it's a fairly low percentage of the fleet. I mean, for all of the publicity and all of the advertisement that you see on TV about all the manufacturers pushing electric vehicles, I went to a local car dealer here for service on our vehicle the other day, and they've got a huge inventory of trucks, and I'm looking around, they're all gasoline-powered trucks. They're not electric trucks. So I don't think that we're going to see this huge turnover on the fleet very soon, but there is a push policy-wise, particularly at the federal level, to increase the number of charging stations available, and
that's definitely happening.
And the manufacturers are investing. You see stories about I think it was Ford that opened up a plant in the South, all geared towards electric vehicles recently. So you're going to see a proliferation of them, and the question is, again, how do you assess a user fee? How do you charge them for the use of the roads? Now, as you open up these public charging stations, those kind of tax assessments are available. But when you plug it into your house, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
So it's a new frontier, if you will.
So oh no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, this is a burning question. The policy leaders, particularly at the national level, of promoting this, but I guess we're still lagging a little bit behind the amount of electricity that we have available and the number of charging stations and so forth.
Right.
So there's a lot of catch-up to be made there, I suppose. Can you briefly talk about the reauthorization of the automated speed enforcement program?
Certainly.
That's something else on the radar.
How do we go into public comment on that? Can we? Just saying.
There is an 11-mile-an-hour grace period, Maura says. So
Whoa.
tap those brakes when you get to a work zone.
Privileged information.
No, it's all right there. We are 5 years into ostensibly a pilot program on automated speed enforcement. We adopted this policy. We mirrored one that we saw in Maryland. The chief difference between Maryland and Pennsylvania is that your first offense is a warning in Pennsylvania. Your first offense in Maryland is a fine. And again, if the sign says 55, the camera isn't going to click you until 66. So somewhere between 55 and 66, you're still good. So. And that's a reasonable speed to be going through a work zone with Jersey barrier and people working there who deserve to go home safely, and also other motorists who are next to you. And the key point there is that most of the accidents and injuries in highway work zones aren't highway workers; it's the motorists themselves. So it's a safety aspect for people driving as well. So we want to clean up a couple of things that need to be fixed with it from a technology standpoint. Maybe make sure that the signage is done properly, and also really move to the first offense being a fine. The goal is to have 0 fines. We're not looking for revenue for this. We're looking for everybody going at a reasonable, safe speed through highway work.
Will there be a final report on how this worked over the pilot project?
Yes, as a matter of fact,
that'll be interesting.
I believe, I don't have the citation in front of me, but I think if somebody were to do an internet search on Pennsylvania's automated work zone speed enforcement program, they can find a full report on PennDOT's website.
Great.
Okay. Bob, thank you very much for the update to our public, and we ask you to stay tuned for the next segment of Behind the Headlines. We'll be right back.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment of the show, Maura and I are fortunate enough to welcome back Dave Sanko to the show. Dave, as you all know, is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure for you to be here. And the thing that everybody's talking about in Harrisburg these days is, of course, we have a new governor that's sworn in, Governor Shapiro, and he has delivered his Commonwealth budget address. And we wondered what surprises were in it for the township. The townships. How does his budget look?
Well, I think we've seen budgets over the years when there's a lot of money and when there's not a lot of money. Clearly,
this year?
There's a lot of money.
Okay.
Clearly, the budgets are easier when there's a lot of money, and he addressed a lot of different priorities, a lot of different categories. I mean, budgets are kind of like a balancing point of trying to assess priorities and against what you have to spend. So he talked about funding a lot of different projects, and at the end of a near record length comments, I think left everybody on the first day saying, "Wow, that was pretty good." It was a great starting point. There was there literally was something for everybody. As they dug into it, by the time the second day rolled around, some began to think, well, maybe there's something for everybody, but not enough for anybody. And it's but smaller amounts. But I think he did a fantastic job of balancing the demands. There, from a local government perspective, the good news is there was no bad news. And that there were no cuts, there were no new unfunded mandates in the proposal. We will have some marginal increases for distressed communities to help them figure out how to improve their conditions. But for the balance of the large chunk of municipalities that are doing their business and running balanced budgets and getting along and satisfying their needs, they're really not impacted, except to the extent that liquid fuels allocations just goes down. But that's because of car efficiencies and electric vehicles, not because of budget reductions.
Well, we just had an opportunity to speak to our previous guest about the dedicated funding for the state police. How do the townships feel about the new proposal from the governor regarding the diversion of what previously had been diversion of money to the state police?
Well, I think it's great news for the state police. Everybody loves to have a dedicated funding base. I mean, townships like having a dedicated funding base for roads and transportation through the liquid fuels allocations. So for state police, it means that they'll have a dedicated funding base. They won't have to negotiate each year for an amount, and he proposes taking that out of motor license, vehicle sales taxes, and maybe a little bit from alcohol, a little bit from cigarettes, and then some of the future growth from recreational marijuana to pay for the state police. So that's where that funding will come from. In terms of the impact on local governments, as all that money is rolled back into the transportation budget, the sad part from a local government perspective is that not a single penny of the money that goes back in will wind up making its way to local governments, because all of that money is dedicated to the Department of Transportation and PennDOT. So it'll help the department, but it's not going to help the communities that are responsible for 2/3 of the roads and bridges in Pennsylvania.
Are there still some opportunities for them to get grant money though for road projects, or is that not going to happen?
I think there is still some federal money that's out there that are eligible for some of the larger projects.
Okay.
But it is PennDOT gets to decide where those dollars go.
Okay.
And I was talking to some folks in Western Pennsylvania, and they said their analysis in their region was that over 80% of the funds in their area were going to state projects and not to local projects.
Oh boy.
Well, as you look at the budget, Dave, and your organization looks what might be there, Of course, there's a lot of discussion around the Capitol of there's a surplus of $12 billion and a rainy day fund with $5 billion in it. Is there the chance that any of these dollars are going to help the townships and the budgetary situation that they're in?
Well, I think through the course of the budget negotiations, we would hope to be able to move some of that to an appropriate common sense share. I mean, nobody's trying to be greedy. You just want to be at the table rather than on the menu.
Yeah. So you mentioned just a moment ago about the governor's budget did not have any new unfunded mandates. That's a good thing. That doesn't eliminate all the current unfunded mandates that are out there. What's the status of a lot of them? Are you still working hard to get rid of some of them, or?
We are, but there are both unfunded mandates or rules or regulations that come from the state or federal government. Right. Both are equally adept at passing on their responsibilities to the locals and saying, you figure it out, you pay for it. So we're going through that. The Local Government Commission and the Legislative Budget Finance Committee are going to be looking at, they did a report 10 years ago of some unfunded mandates and found out that there were 7,000 unfunded mandates just on local government in Pennsylvania. 3,500 of those have been imposed by the legislature, and the other 3,500 were imposed by the courts or executive agencies. So they're going to go through and look to see some of those hopefully have gone away, but some of them are just kind of hard to explain to people and ridiculous. I mean, federally they a couple years ago said that all the traffic signs had to be replaced all across America because they didn't reflect enough at night.
Was that a font issue? There was some kind
and there was a font issue, and
yeah.
It wasn't easy to read, so it cost untold millions of dollars to replace all those things. Now, when you're off mowing along the road, you have to have a separate truck that drives behind you, which is a safety matter. But in small rural areas where you don't have a lot of traffic count, instead of having one person out cutting the grass, now you need two vehicles and two people and twice as much fuel, and that's just one of the sillier mandates.
Wow.
Dave, did it surprise you or the association that the new governor actually may have surprised some of us, continued support for what Governor Wolf did with the regional greenhouse gas initiative? Of course, that's in the courts right now, and can an executive order be used in this fashion to substitute for legislation? Did that surprise the townships at all? This continued support for this measure?
Townships, I mean, the townships, it's not an issue actually that townships, are affected by on a day-to-day basis, but it will affect citizens, it will affect cost of energy. I think the surprise was in that as we went through the course of the campaign, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether, maybe not, we'll see, we'll look at it. And a lot of that uncertainty went away when he made his announcement. So I think it was a surprise announcement that I don't think folks were expecting to be part of the budget.
So I think you would probably call it it's that time of year. Your conference is coming up.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
It's that time of year.
I thought you meant the budget. I was going to say,
no,
the silly
we
season.
Covered that. Well, that too.
Yeah,
that too.
We'll skip silly season, jump to our conference.
Something a little bit more serious.
Sure.
Your conference. Why don't you give us the dates and what do you have new and different and to look forward to this year?
Okay. Well, we're going to have it the last week of April 23rd to 26th. In Hershey, we'll have between 3,000 and 4,000 folks will be down there coming in to have a lot of educational opportunities in Hershey.
In Hershey, yeah.
We'll have over 100 different workshops for folks to go and learn from things from liquid fuels to budgeting to pension investments. So all types of topics, something for everyone. We'll have an exhibit show, a trade show, with lots of vendors where people can go and see things that they may have an interest in purchasing, and we'll hear some great speakers. We'll also it's our annually where we set our policies. So our resolutions that have come from townships and up through the county associations will be presented to the state conference and will become legislative policy that will help us set priorities for the legislature.
Yeah, that's great.
This year's not an election year; it's an off-election year, and it looks, as we look across the state, that there are lots of uncontested races around the state. Does this mean that this continuation of the difficulty of finding volunteers for public service and for public office is continuing? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the township?
Sure. Well, I think a couple things. First, while it is not a big, high-profile, fancy, glitzy presidential election or gubernatorial election, it is still local elections and municipal elections, and those, in fact, probably have a greater impact on citizens' day-to-day lives than who's sitting in the White House or the governor's mansion. I mean, making your community safe is something done at the township level. As we look at the folks that are running, and when we talk about uncontested races, I think rather than think uncontested races are a result of difficulty in finding people to run, I think it's more appropriate to look at those as where the communities and citizens are happy and content with the level and quality of government that they're getting locally, so that those local officials, we're not seeing vacancies where nobody's running. We're seeing places where people are running for re-election, and voters are satisfied with their with the product and the outcome, and low taxes and safe communities. Sometimes it's hard to run against low taxes and safe communities.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Maura, you have a final question?
Well, no, I think we have the dates of your upcoming conference, and we know what you're going to be working on in the we'll find out what you're going to be working on in the next year from a policy perspective. So I think we're good. Okay.
Well, Dave, we want to thank you again for being with us, and we wish you success with your conference.
Okay.
Is there one particular speaker or one particular exhibit that stands out among all of them?
Well, I think we've done a couple things new this year. One, we've moved the PSAT's general exhibit to the center of the exhibit hall. It'll be much more of a focal point, and we're also going to have a legislative event down there where we've already got 600 people signed up to attend.
You handling this for so many years, it's like being a ringmaster for a three-ring circus. There's so much going on.
There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of different things. We're anxious to hear from Governor Shapiro, a new governor, and what his views are on partnering with local government. Lieutenant Governor Davis, who will chairs the Local Government Advisory Committee, is going to be speaking there on Tuesday morning, and on a Wednesday, we're super excited to be able to have a cabinet forum with 3 or 4 of the governor's cabinet members who talk mostly about their interactions with local government, transportation, environmental protection, community and economic development, as well as emergency management.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dave, and good luck with that. And again, we want to send our prayers to Senator Fetterman. We'll be back next week with a new edition of Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.